In 2012, I came to a realization. This little piece of plastic that was collecting dust in my room, known as the PSP, was actually a very good system for RPGs. So I went online to find some of the best RPGs on the PSP, and one of the games that was most consistently brought up was The Legend of Heroes: Trails in the Sky. This game was a curious case. It was made by Falcom and originally released on PC in Japan in 2004, but it wasn't until 2011 that the PSP version was localized by XSeed Games. It was a very quiet release that had very little marketing. As a result, the sales were initially not great, with Tom from XSeed stating, "The first game hasn't exactly turned out to be a top seller for us. But over time, something changed. People like me were going online, reading about the game, buying it, and absolutely loving it. With time, the word began to spread, and the sales continued to trickle in. In 2013, almost 9 years after the initial release, Trails in the Sky reached 500,000 units sold. The following year, Trails in the Sky saw a release on Steam, and with it, hundreds of thousands of gamers were introduced to the series. And to put icing on the cake, the first two Trails of Cold Steel games have recently hit a combined 1,000,000 units sold. These may not sound like huge numbers, but for smaller companies like XSeed and Falcom, every single sale matters. The series definitely has a long way to go, but it's also come a very long way. So, how did this happen? How did this series go from being relatively unknown in the West to selling over 1,000,000 worldwide almost purely on word of mouth? Why were people like myself loving the game and recommending it to everybody else? To answer these questions, we will be doing an overview of The Legend of Heroes: Trails in the Sky and why it's worth your money. The plot and setting of Trails in the Sky are some of the strongest aspects of the game. It's a plot that takes time to develop and progress, but one that will keep you absolutely enthralled through its twists and turns. The Trails series takes place on the continent of Zemuria, which consists of 4 countries: Liberl Kingdom, the Erebonian Empire, the Republic of Calvard, and the Crossbell State. It's not a particularly unique setting for an RPG, but it's a setting that is developed in the best possible way. This is a recurring theme for this game. None of its aspects redefine the genre. Instead, Trails in the Sky takes the strengths of the genre and pushes it to its limits. Each of these countries have their own sense of culture, aspirations, and national pride. They feel like real nations, one in which you can travel to and understand how to conduct yourself in their respective cultures. The Trails in the Sky trilogy focuses on Liberl Kingdom, a nation whose very identity is under constant threat. The kingdom neighbors the Erebonian Empire and the Republic of Calvard, 2 superpowers that Liberl cannot possibly match in terms of military might. But despite this fact, Liberl consistently stands up for itself and remains autonomous. The game starts off with our protagonists, Estelle and Joshua Bright. Estelle is the daughter of Cassius Bright, a famous war hero who saved Liberl from Erebonia's wrath during an event known as the 100 Days War. During one of his missions, Cassius met Joshua, a boy who was initially very hostile, but eventually got taken into the Bright household as an adoptive son. Together, Estelle and Joshua have been training to become bracers, who are essentially freelance do-gooders that solve requests of common townspeople. The beginning of this game draws a lot of similarities with the original Grandia, a classic JRPG in its own right. Both games are light-hearted stories about adventure and innocence, with Justin, the protagonist of Grandia, wanting to travel the world to find the ancient civilization of Angelou, and Estelle wanting to travel Liberl and help her country as a bracer. But these 2 games are also about the loss of innocence. Estelle and Justin are both met with struggles that requires them to mature, and both stories take a much darker tone as they progress. At the start of the game, Estelle and Joshua successfully pass their bracer exams and earn the title of Junior Bracer, but they soon realize that something is rotten in the state of Liberl. Cassius receives a letter from the Bracer Guild and is shocked by its contents. He leaves immediately. This was shocking news for Estelle and Joshua. but they decide to strengthen their own resolve of becoming fully fledged bracers. What follows is an incredible journey, one in which Estelle and Joshua travel through Liberl and work as bracers while also uncovering the larger issues of the nation. It's the little things that count in Trails in the Sky. Estelle and Joshua are traveling from town to town and aiding with various issues in each of them. But it's in these smaller scale conflicts where we get to see the intricate little interactions that separates Trails from other JRPGs. It fleshes out the world at a much deeper level than the overwhelming majority of the genre. We get to see Rolent's tight-knit community of miners, Ruan's tourist appeal and student life, Zeiss's incredible work and research in advancing orbital technology, Bose's shopping craze, and Grancel's pride as the capital city, home of the Queen of Liberl. But during the travels, we also get hints of a much larger conflict, rising up in the background, one that's incredibly large in scale and ambitious. It's well worth the wait as it involves an extremely detailed and intricate plan that threatens the entire continent. It has many parties at work, and some of the most likable and believable villains in an RPG. The villains rise to prominence in Trails in the Sky 2nd chapter, where you learn each of their individual stories. The player can learn to understand each of their backstories and motivations. You can really see why they do what they do, but you will also realize that they're ultimately in the wrong. And to me, that's the best possible villain I can ask for. This next section may potentially have some light spoilers, so here's the timestamp for the section after. What I love about this game is that it's not your typical save the world storyline. What we see in Trails in the Sky is Estelle and Joshua's story within a much larger conflict. It's about their desire to find their father and become reunited, to return to the peaceful life that they once had with their friends and family. What this does is that it humanizes the characters and their motives in a way that most JRPGs do not. As much as I love the genre, it's a little bit annoying when the final fight is against a god with the fate of humanity in the hands of an overpowered teenage boy. Estelle and Joshua certainly do solve larger issues along the way and make significant contributions, but it's ultimately a personal journey for them. In fact, while Estelle and Joshua are certainly competent fighters, they are nowhere near the strongest in the series, and they don't need to be to achieve their goals. In addition to making the characters feel more grounded, the focus on Estelle and Joshua's personal story makes the player realize that the overarching conflicts are extremely grand in scale. There are dozens of different groups and individuals at play in this conflict, each of them vying to achieve a specific goal. Not even the most powerful characters in the series can solve the conflicts on their own. Instead, it requires a large collective effort. Estelle and Joshua are just a speck within this conflict, which is something very humbling as a player. But at the same time, the story succeeds in making you care about their personal journey. Trails in the Sky has the greatest cast of characters in any game that I have ever played, and it's not even close. There are certainly characters in other games that are just as complex and interesting as a Trails character, but Trails shines in the depth of its cast. Every single character in its main cast is just as well developed as your usual JRPG protagonist. In fact, I can tell you much more about any of the party members in Trails than I can about the main group in Final Fantasy XV. The supporting cast is also extremely well developed, to the point where the game has literally made me care about receptionists, children, researchers, and reporters. To give you guys an example, let's take a look at the Rolent Bracer Guild receptionist, Ina Holden. Through our interactions with her at the start of the game, we come to realize that she's somebody who is very formal because she has a bit of a nervous side to her. She's somebody who is very supportive of new bracers like Estelle and Joshua, and genuinely cares about advancing the Bracer Guild as a whole. We also find out that she is best friends with Sherazard, one of our party members, and that they frequently go out drinking together. Compare her to a character like Vaughn, the protagonist of Final Fantasy XII, and you will see that they are actually very close in their level of characterization. What can we say about Vaughn? He's a naive and idealistic boy who experienced a lot of trauma when he was younger and wants to get back at the people who caused it. He aspires to become a sky pirate so that he can one day freely roam the skies. And there's not much else we can say about him than that. Vaughn and Aina are surprisingly close in their level of characterization, despite the fact that Aina is a minor character. Now, to Final Fantasy XII's credit, characters like Balthier and Ash get a lot more characterization than Vaughn, but it's still impressive that a side character like Aina is comparable to a character that's in the main party of another RPG. Even the everyday NPCs in Trails have something interesting to say. Their dialogue changes as the game progresses, and they even have their own interesting little plot threads that develop throughout the game. Falcom's attention to detail is incredible in this game, and you can really see how much love they put into it. And to top it all off, Estelle gets an incredibly natural and human character arc from the start of the first chapter to the end of the second game. She starts off as a hot-headed and bubbly girl, but slowly evolves into a mature woman that makes much better decisions, but also retains a little bit of her hot-headedness. Here's a visual example of her character arc. She is gradually improving and bettering herself, but also has moments when she reverts a little bit due to a hardship or improves significantly after a triumph. And this happens in such a gradual way that you don't even realize it's happening until you sit down and think about it at the end of the series. This graph can also apply to the other characters in the game, although to a much lesser extent. Compare that to the usual video game protagonists, where you only really get development after a major event. Now, this isn't necessarily bad. It's honestly very difficult to have a character development arc that's subtle and gradual. The fact that Trails successfully pulls it off truly shows how strong it is in the character department. Now, there is one final note I want to make about characters, which is that they are all rooted in anime tropes, but it uses these tropes very effectively. They are baselines that the characters grow from and diverge from in fascinating ways. Just like with the setting, the characters in Trails do not redefine the genre. Instead, Trails takes characters in JRPGs and anime to the next level, pushing them in the best possible way. The gameplay in Trails in the Sky is good. I generally have fun with the battle system, and it is very deep, but I must say that I primarily play this series for its story and characters. Trails follows a traditional turn order battle system in the same realm as Final Fantasy X. It also features a grid system, and your basic attack involves your party member moving through the grid to the enemy and launching their attacks. But I want to emphasize that this is not a strategy RPG. It's not even close. A strategy RPG features long battles where you are commanding an army and facing an enemy force. There is none of that in Trails in the Sky. The main purpose of the grid system is for area of effect arts and crafts. Arts are essentially magic skills, which the user can begin casting and then launch their attack further down in the turn order. These include elemental attacks, buffs and debuffs, and healing spells. On the other hand, crafts are character-specific skills that consume CP, which is gained from attacking the enemy, tanking hits, and certain equipment. And once again, they can be offensive attacks, buffs and debuffs, and occasionally even a healing skill. If a character accumulates more than 100 CP, they can launch an S-craft, which is essentially like a limit break from Final Fantasy VII. These arts and crafts form the foundation of the Trails battle system, and there are a lot of strategies you can build around them. It's quite rewarding to plan out your party in a way that optimizes these mechanics and using it to take down enemies. Trails also features quite a lot of customizability with its orbment system. This is a device where you attach material called quartz. What this does is that it assigns a value to different elements, such as water, fire, earth, and more. Characters can learn a specific art by meeting the point values required for that particular art. But meeting the requirement for arts of a specific element means that you will have to sacrifice arts of another element. What this does is that it requires you to think about what arts would be best suited for your character, based on their specific strengths and weaknesses. As a result, you have a lot of customizability, but the game also succeeds in making every character distinct and unique. The characters are quite different stat-wise, and in addition, they typically have a few slots on their orbments that are restricted to a particular element. What this means is that there will be quite a lot of variability in the layout of each of your character's orbments. And to top it all off, crafts are completely unique for every character, which really makes you think about who you want to use. Overall, I think this battle system is very solid, and it's quite enjoyable for me. Falcom, in my opinion, is the best video game company when it comes to music. Their soundtracks are composed by a group of professional musicians known as the Falcom Sound Team JDK, and they are at their best in Trails in the Sky. I love how they can capture the lightheartedness of the game through tracks like Provincial City of Roland and Seaport City of Rouen. And as always, they brilliantly capture emotional moments through In My Heart and high tension moments through my personal favorite track, Silver Will. Do yourself a favor and listen to some of these tracks. They're incredible. Before we get into the flaws of the game, I want to make a quick note about the game's localization. As I mentioned at the start of the video, this game was translated by XSeed Games, and in my opinion, they are unmatched when it comes to the quality of their localizations. Quite frankly, a lot of JRPG localizations are pretty bad. They either read like a direct Google Translate, or they go too far in the other direction and replace the Japanese text with some ridiculous meme. XSeed strikes the perfect balance. Their text makes perfect sense in the English language, but they also remain faithful to the original meaning of the text. Given that Trails in the Sky is a dialogue-heavy game that's full of kanji, it's extremely impressive that they were able to make such a high-quality translation. They even add their own personal touch to it. For example, if you interact with a treasure chest that you have already opened, you get a witty and entertaining line. It's not much, but it's these little things that show how much love they really put into the game. I also have to give them respect for localizing second chapter, despite the first game initially selling very poorly. They knew that there was a good chance that they would lose money on second chapter, but they did it anyways for fans such as myself, who really wanted to see how this story continued. There's a very interesting story behind this game's localization. If you want to learn more, I would highly recommend the article The Curse of Kiseki. I'll put a link to it in the description. Now let's get into the game's flaws. No matter how much we love a game, I think it's important to recognize what it doesn't do too well. Trails in the Sky certainly has a few issues. The first is mostly a matter of taste, which is that Trails in the Sky is a slower paced game. A lot of the game involves smaller plot threads, and it takes quite a while for the larger plot points to really start kicking in. There are some people out there who do not enjoy the slower pacing of this game, and I can totally understand why. But this is also a point that I ultimately disagree with. It's because of these slower moments that we see the world get fully fleshed out. It's because of these moments that we see a cast of characters that's unmatched in any other JRPG. And once the larger plot threads start coming to play, you are in for a wild ride. I think I could speak for most fans of this game when I say that I enjoy every single moment of it. The second flaw has to do with the battle system, in particular boss fights. The bosses are a little bit too tanky for my liking. A lot of them take a long time to beat and aren't even that difficult. In addition, there's an over-reliance on S-crafts, with many boss battles requiring you to constantly spam these attacks to take them down. And I also have a personal pet peeve in JRPGs, which is when you defeat a boss in gameplay, but in the subsequent story scenes, the enemy seems perfectly fine. It makes it seem like my fight was for nothing, and I gotta say, Trails is guilty of this. However, it's worth noting that this issue is much more apparent in the Trails of Cold Steel games, but Trails in the Sky still has these issues to a lesser extent. The next flaw involves backtracking. This issue mainly applies to Trails in the Sky's second chapter, which is that you will be frequently revisiting previous areas. Now, there is always a good story reason behind the backtracking, and it is definitely nice to see the NPCs change over time. Nonetheless, the backtracking is still not preferable and definitely worth mentioning. And finally, there's the graphics. Trails in the Sky is a low-budget 2004 game, and as such, the graphics reflect this. I think that they hold up reasonably well, but I can also understand why they can be an eyesore if you're used to playing the newest PC games. Regardless, I would highly suggest to do your best to get used to these graphics. It's worth it. The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky is not necessarily a genre redefining game. Instead, it takes the strengths of the genre and runs with it. The setting is well established. You will come to love Liberl as you travel the country with Estelle and Joshua. Falcom has built a fantastic world, one that is still being fleshed out with the Trails of Cold Steel games. The gameplay is good, with its traditional turn order mechanics and strong customization through its orbment system. The game's plot is extremely strong. It's ambitious and starts off very promising, and it successfully follows through in an incredible way. This is a game that's very special to me, so I hope that I was able to share my passion with all of you. The game is not without its flaws, but it more than makes up for it with its characters. You will see them grow before your very eyes, and you will come to realize how human they really are. And that is why The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky is worth your money. Thank you all for watching today. If you're wondering what version to get, PC is probably your best bet. It has the best overall performance, and it adds turbo mode, which speeds up the combat. If you want to play this game portably, the PSP version is available for download on the Vita, and it's a competent version of the game. As always, this has been Keon, and if you enjoyed this video, it would mean the world to me if you subscribe to my channel. For those of you who are new to this channel, I personally like to drop hints of the next games that I'm going to be covering in this series. Currently, there's actually 2 of them that I'm working on, and I'm not quite sure which one will come out first. So, I'm actually going to drop hints for both of them. So, the hint for game number 1 is that it takes place in Shibuya. So, once again, the hint for game number 1 is that it takes place in Shibuya, and for game number 2, the hint is the word source. This is a central aspect of the game. So anyways guys, I hope you're looking forward to these videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.